Hi, I'm Ridley Scott. I'm about to talk about Body of Lies. This was a development that we took on almost a year and a half prior to filming. I'd met with a writer called David Ignatius who had this manuscript of his book, which would be called Penetration. Fairly quickly, the publisher got onto this idea that he thought penetration might come across as being rather ridiculous, so it ended up as the title, Body of Lies. I think I preferred penetration, but anyway, here we are. What attracted me about the actual material was the density of knowledge that Ignatius had, having spent 30 years studying and being a journalist in the Middle East for the Washington Post. His knowledge of the Arab mind is fascinating, and of course there's a lot about the Arabs that we don't understand or realize, but there's a great elegance in the Arab community, and a lot of the people I know certainly.
I'm David Ignatius. I'm the author of Body of Lies, the novel on which this movie is based. I'm now a columnist for the Washington Post, and I've been traveling in the Middle East, the part of the world you're going to see in this movie, for almost 30 years. I began as a war correspondent in Beirut in 1980, and I just kept going back again and again. When I was thinking about what al-Qaeda might do after the war in Iraq, there was a phrase I heard from somebody at the CIA, which was bleed out, that what we might see was the carnage of Iraq, all of the anger that Iraqis felt about the American invasion bleeding out in operations that would take place against targets in Europe and the United States. And what you're seeing here is an example of a cell bleeding out, planning operations, trying to bring the violence they felt to us like that. I've been to Iraq more than 15 times since the war began. I first went to Iraq in 1980 to cover the Iraq-Iran war. So this is a place I know all too well, I'd have to say. And when I was trying to think of the education of the CIA officer whose story this movie tells, Roger Ferris, it seemed important to me that he be an officer in Iraq, trying to get his arms around the threat there, trying to blend into that society using his gifts as a speaker of Arabic, and trying to recruit the agents who could tell us the secrets that would keep our people alive.
This is William Monahan, screenwriter. This is the second produced picture that Ridley and I have worked on together, but we go back a bit further than that, almost 10 years now. David Ignatius's book was a very complicated thriller, and the job here was to capture the essence of the book while compressing it as a film. The usual problem with doing movies from books is that, the ideal way is to do them on 14 Tuesday nights. But here we had to make a 2-hour picture, and the compression was arduous, and I think, and David agrees, pretty successful. Ridley hammered at the film, getting it down, getting it tighter.
We begin with a man who actually is already reflecting on should he continue doing this. So he's a man already thinking about getting out. There's too much in terms of the violence of his job that has got to him where almost anything goes to get information. So we have a rather alarming interrogation sequence here with a cricket bat where they're basically beating this man up for information, and where Ferris was present in the room. When that happened, the person in the room under pressure of the cricket bat had died, and Ferris barely reacts to that. He's not happy, it's par for the course and par for what he does. So he is constantly now looking inward to decide, is this the world that he wants to be in? That carries us through the film. So it's a very reflective character that goes through the film. Ed Hoffman, who is Russell Crowe, is one of these guys who functions whether he's taking the kids to school, whether he's actually making breakfast for himself in the morning, because he can't sleep. So he's one of these guys who gets up at 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. before dawn, does most of his best work before the family gets up. Very much bound comfortably in Washington, whereas his field operators are really uncomfortable doing the job they do in all these war zones. So Hoffman is a person who actually addresses frontline political personalities, and notwithstanding, it could even be the President of the United States. In this instance, I try to avoid that being always a cliche, but he's talking to someone fairly important right here who will probably convey his policy about where he thinks we are today and what must be done and how we must function. And that will be relayed probably to the higher echelons of power in Washington and to probably the President of the United States, who I'm sure won't listen.
Yeah, this bit, the fighting guys from the future bit, was very important to getting across what was going on in the whole story. After all, the entire film is about trying to get these people who have gone anti-technology to come just resurface in the digital world so they can be captured. So it's a very important bit for the film.
Russell Crowe, as Hoffman is talking here about the most difficult operational challenge the CIA has today, which is that our adversary has learned to go silent. We own the digital communication space. By we, I mean the United States and our allies, which means that we have the ability, if we're being aggressive, to monitor almost everything that moves in digital space. And so Al-Qaeda smartly, cleverly has moved to primitive techniques of communication. They'll move with couriers, they'll move with old-fashioned secret writing as a way of avoiding our greatest asset, which is their ability to monitor them. Even where you're using primitive methods, you have to have means of carrying the digital information that's important. Al-Qaeda lives off of the videos it broadcasts of Osama bin Laden, and Zawahiri is number 2. And those are often carried on thumb drives from person to person, and then plugged into a computer and sent over a line that they think we don't know about. Well, once in a blue moon, the agency and its allies are able to intercept that chain, and when they do, they have a gold mine. The toughest thing for them when they get a hit like that, when they know something, is to keep it quiet.
Rules of the day.
Leo's description of the rules of the day in this scene is based directly on what a friend of mine who was a CIA operations officer in Iraq told me are the rules of the day, which is that if you get to a checkpoint and a terrorist enemy is trying to stop you and search you and you're in disguise, you start shooting, because you're not going to bargain, you're not going to talk, you're not going to trade, you're just going to shoot your way out. And in most cases, he told me, it's enough to scare people away. They run.
I mean, they're 4 times in Morocco now making big movies, and this is the 4th. I love the town, I love the textures, I love the smells, I love the streets, and I actually really like the people. It's funny, everybody seems to know me, so I seem to be welcome there, so there's no angst or anxiety when I turn up and make another movie. In fact, kids from Black Hawk Down who were then toddlers or were then 11 years old and now are either 15 or 16 or 18 would come racing up saying, you're going to make another movie. So they remember. They really remember.
3-1.
Here we have Oscar Isaacs, who's going to be his local operative. These guys are partners in the process of what they do. They check on leads, and like all good and great police work, it's continual following through hunches, leads, information from whatever source, it doesn't matter. They'll follow through. And one day, like any good cop wants to do, he wants to get a break. Once he gets the breakthrough and he follows that break, and frequently it leads nowhere, occasionally it gets the results they want. So that's who these guys are. They're basically army cops, army detectives, army operatives, which are now probably very closely associated with CIA. They're essentially spies. This is how they function. So they're following a lead here, which is kind of we don't know why they're doing it. We don't need to know why we're doing it. We're just watching process and procedure, which, as I've said, I really like that. And I like to make it as accurate as possible. Therefore, in many respects, whilst it's incredibly efficient, it's casual. These guys never think they're James Bond. They are who they are, and there's a lot of joking between them. They're usually fairly close, otherwise you couldn't spend hours in a car every day with a person you hate. They're sturdily efficient, scarily efficient, with every kind of weapon, and they're here on a hunch and a lead that Oscar had, based on a hearsay and a friend, of a guy who's got information, who is a man who's educated, and they believe is fairly closely associated with AQ, Al-Qaeda. I think over Iraq and Afghanistan and over that arena or circus, I've heard there's as many as 250 predators, they call them. Some predators can actually carry rockets and weapons, or some are purely a bird's eye view, which are then relayed back to, I always thought it was Virginia, but actually it's Las Vegas. And so these guys can actually look from 29,000 feet where you can't see the craft, but they can see you. They can hear the change in your pocket jingling. They can hear your dialogue clearly. They can record you. They can zoom in to, really very tight sizes where you can actually read the number of a registration plate on a vehicle. So this has become a significant part of the process of espionage in these territories now, because they can be sitting up there and no one really even looks up to see them. Particularly as you're given normally very clear vision in these climates, apart from the odd sandstorm or winter months. They're incredibly efficient and very useful. So this predator has become a bit of a character in the movie. And you see how they're able to use the predator to make themselves, function. This is the guy who turns out to be a linguist. He speaks 5 languages. He is desperately afraid. He's been working definitely on the peripheral edges of Al-Qaeda. What he suggests is to become an operative to do with some bombings, which places him in a very dangerous position, because it may mean that they will ask him to carry a bomb and blow himself up, and he doesn't want to do that. He's not that passionate about the beliefs. And therefore he has the information which becomes key, not so much as to where he is, but a recent propaganda disc, which we see here, of al-Salim. Al-Salim is the known kind of number 2 in Al-Qaeda. Number 1, if bin Laden exists or is alive today, then that's fine, then this guy's number 2. But if bin Laden doesn't exist today, then I would rather propagate the notion that I'm still number 2 because number 1 exists, so that I tend to be looking for a guy above me that doesn't actually exist. Everything is very deliberately diffused and confused from the very beginning. He's got the disc, it's the latest disc. Where was he? Because by the time I decipher where this disc was taken, he's going to be no longer there, that's for sure. It could be a room in Berlin. It could, just because you get a Moroccan blanket behind his head doesn't say where he is. It could be in Virginia. Ferris identifies this as the most recent picture of Salim, and no one's seen this one before, and that he's going to send it to him. But it spells out loud and clear a message, basically that the AQ are going to continue step up their bombings on various cities, where eventually they are heading for the big one. And the thing that they're always concerned about is nuclear. The possibility that capability gets in the wrong hands would be beyond disastrous. And it's really feasible. I think there have been so many nuclear devices have been sold from silos in Russia over the last 30 years that no one knows where half of them are. The stockpile, basically sold to people with lots of money, probably gangsters, very wealthy third world countries who've got the money to buy these things, to have the devices. So these devices may be lying in the hands of people who really don't know how to handle them. And therefore, it's incredibly dangerous.
I love the fact that we see Hoffman through this movie with his children, and sometimes the most unlikely situations like this one where he's taking this boy to the toilet. It's a reminder that CIA officers, even very senior ones, are ordinary folks. They've got families. They're trying to keep things going. They've got working wives. There's a sort of ordinary, down-to-earth nature to the people. We all grew up watching James Bond movies, so we think they always wear tuxedos and drink martinis. Baloney. They're taking their kids to the bathroom.
So they're going to do a deal with him. They're going to take him in. Unfortunately, Ed Hoffman's saying there's no point in taking him in because he's going to be more useful to us on the street. He's going to say, yeah, but on the street, he's going to get knocked off within 3 days, he said. So Ed says, well, if he does, stick close to him, you may see who knocks him off. That'll be useful. So it's a very cold-blooded and heartless world on a man who just wants to come in, and what he would hope for here would be to get asylum, probably flown to the United States, and live happily ever after. That ain't going to happen.
That order from Hoffman illustrates something that really haunts me about the CIA, which is that they seduce, they ask people to risk their lives, and then they often let them go to their fate, which is often disastrous. And that bothers me sometimes. I look at this character, Nizar, who's come to the CIA offering his help, and, you know, we're using him. And Roger Ferris being very tough in following orders and using him. But that's a reality of that world. It's a world of use and be used. But it bothers me, I have to say. It's one reason I wouldn't be a very good intelligence officer.
Can't even protect yourselves.
That line haunts me. When an American says in Iraq, in the Middle East, anywhere in the world, we're here to protect you, the rejoinder increasingly from somebody would be, you can't protect yourself.
Yeah, I'm right here. I got a visual.
Russell Crowe put on, as you can see, weight for this part. He wanted to. Russell loves to, you know, take on completely different personas and also take on physical differences. You saw it when he did the film called The Insider. That's part of his art. He thinks it's important as important as him taking on a certain kind of accent and working on the accent, working on the physical appearance, working on the hair. That's why I like working with him. He is 100% all out. And in fact, so was Leo. It was a really good experience with both of them. So we're now following this guy to see just that. Who is liable to come for him, because it's going to happen during this day, and it's quicker than he thought. He's having tea in this little marketplace, and he's already got 4 guys. They want to apprehend him and question him. So he's going to ride off. What they do is they shoot him in the legs. He'll now be taken, and he will be interviewed, probably with pliers and a hammer. So Ferris has to execute him. He shot him through the top of the head. Reason being that within an hour, this guy will be feeding absolutely full-bore description of Ferris and his buddy, and these 2 guys will become redundant in this war zone, and therefore they're more valuable alive than that guy is dead. So that's what they do. It's pretty tough. And this is showing where Ferris's, it's not disgruntlement, it's actually, I think he's beginning to be, it's abhorrent for him what he's actually doing. He used to think he would make a difference, but now he is not sure about that. He's not sure that all this stuff is necessary to actually allow us to have a better world. So he's thinking very strongly about should he be doing this.
Hear me? We're going north to the Balad safe house.
No, buddy. No, you're not. You're blown. Just chatter.
What Leo's doing here may seem unlikely, but in the early days in the Iraq War and every day in Afghanistan, you do have CIA officers out dressed as local people, undercover, in dirty cars whose license plates can be changed every day, sometimes twice a day, decorated with hood ornaments and all the bric-a-brac that you'd see. Another friend of mine who was for many years an operations officer in Beirut used to drive in a little Lebanese taxi, beat up little Hyundai, if I remember what he told me. Cheapest car he could find, all dented up, and he would darken his skin. He'd have a heavy beard. Sometimes he'd go in this dishdash, the headscarf that Arabs wear. And if you look tough enough, tough and mean enough in the streets, and you're in the right car and you're brave enough, you're going to get away with it.
This was gone over several times, and this is much the best version of it. I think I'd written it with Ferris simply opening fire from the hillside and killing the man who was doing this. But Ridley wanted to do this, and I agree with him now. It's impossible to explain or describe, I should say, the extent to which Ridley had the bit between his teeth on this one. It's always hard work, but this process was particularly arduous.
In Baghdad. Rasafa.
Who knew Leo DiCaprio spoke such good Arabic? But he's been it's very well done. And it makes his character believable. A good case officer would know Arabic, I hope, as well as DiCaprio does here.
They're very efficient, as you can see. No one gets a second breather. You've got execute first and then worry about it afterwards. Now he's got to go right in and actually take out whoever's in there. There's going to be no negotiation. But it's a one-on-one. There may be 3 or 6 in there, he has no idea.
I had to go away for a week to a house on the East Coast and just get away from everybody and cut basically 30 pages out of the script that I didn't want to lose. You know, it was by almost an act of violence getting rid of the pages because everything was good. I said the other day to David we could easily get another movie out of his book. We just couldn't put those couple of movies into the one movie that this has to be.
Never having been in the situation, I can't tell whether the smile is for real or not, but certainly, you know, we see people willing to die by the hundreds, by the thousands, and I think that's one of the toughest parts of this war. People believe in the cause, and as we saw with kamikazes, Japan ran against our aircraft carriers in World War II. It's very tough to stop an adversary who will use that tactic. We didn't think of that as suicide bombing, but it was.
They see this digital raining down of rocks. People never do that. When a bomb goes off like that, debris, see that debris, would fly in the air 200 feet. So particles are still dropping, and sometimes a big piece will drop, like a big one like this. It'll rain down and bounce on the roof of the car, see? So that's all put in digital. Believe it or not, we didn't destroy that cottage. And all we did, all that is a blast with cork and a bit of flame. So we did pretty well all our second unit. Everything was done with us. Sometimes in these big films you have second unit doing it, but you know, we all like to do the second unit because the second unit's fun. It's action. And when you've got a big unit there, you know, very often it's not economical to have an action sequence going with 400 people standing around some small setup when actually 45 would be fine. So, but, you know, we like to do it. They're calling in here air backup because there's 2 against 1, and these are desert vehicles, and they're better than they are, they're faster than they are. He knows he's in trouble. And the while are being watched and followed by satellite. When the RPGs appear, now they're in real trouble because this RPG is heat-seeking. So actually that RPG can take him out. Fortunately, he has a go at the rocket, whoop, at the chopper, and then he takes him out.
Writing this scene, I was imagining the nightmare of being pursued by people, particularly with RPGs. When I was in Lebanon, everybody you see used to have an RPG on the street corner, and you'd pass kids 15 years old, and you'd think that guy's going to let go of that RPG.
I'm so used to doing this stuff now, I feel like a goddamn field commander. I learned it all on Black Hawk Down, and that was really strident. I'm still deaf in one ear. That was really tough, and you're functioning in the field as if you were on a big maneuver. So it's the same thing here. Doing this was pretty straightforward.
One thing about the CIA is that you never know who its casualties are. The CIA famously has a series of stars on its wall at headquarters. The stars are anonymous, but they stand for the names of people who've been killed in action. The numbers, the places, the identities, we don't know, but it is a dangerous game.
He gets taken out in the blast and ends up in a field hospital. Bassam's body was not recovered. It was literally vaporized with the RPG. So Ferris is coming out of his dream, bad dream, about the cross-examination. Ferris is now having particles of bone removed from him, which are not his bone, the Bassam, his buddy's bone. People don't think about those things. You know, when a bomb goes off, it's indescribably horrific.
This is the first movie I've been involved with that I wasn't able to be on location. Kingdom of Heaven and The Departed, I was on location just about every day. But this time the writer's strike was going on, so I feel like I lost a huge block of my education, which I depend on Ridley for.
40 pages of that. I got like about 712 phone numbers that are new to us that we can strip and evaluate. And amongst
Phone numbers are going to win this war, if we win it, because they allow us entry into this digital communication space that we own. You need places to start. You need to know, what the tags are, and then once you have the tags, you line them up with other tags. You can, using modern computer programs, you can say there's a gas station in Pakistan where people have stopped and bought things, and let's just imagine that people are making phone calls from a payphone in that gas station. You can match up the numbers that Hoffman just got. You can, do elaborate computer runs, and you can get a discrete universe. I mean, imagine a haystack that's got millions of pieces of hay. If if you could find a way to sift it down so it wasn't millions but 100 pieces of hay, each of whom you knew had at least been in contact with the thing you were looking for, you might be able to find the needle, and that's what they're trying to do here.
So you'll go to Oman?
With me, it's not endless, long, earnest discussions and, constant rehearsal. We move like lightning, so it occurs right from the very onset, talking, because I would engage with Leo knowing that he wants to do this, engage with him in sharing conversations about the character as it's being written. Then when he gets the first read, then he makes notes about that character, and then we'll talk about that. Then there'll be the adjustments. By the time you get with the film unit in the place, I am usually flying. I mean, I know exactly everything about everything, and for the most part, so do they. So already, everyone's doing their homework, including any actor like that is already doing his homework. So he's already creatively formulating in his mind everything from his walk to we'll agree on some kind of accent that he wants to work on with a coach, dialect coach. And it all kind of comes together. So when people ever follow me, they say, Jesus, you never sat and rehearsed. I said, no, you don't. By the time he walked to the floor, I probably read it around a table like this in the hotel and done some adjustments. When we're on the floor, like here is the floor where it's, wherever it is, it's a studio, whether it's a location. In this instance, it's all location. I know exactly what I'm going to do, exactly. So I just walk in saying, right, camera's here, there, Leo will be here in 20 minutes, let's get moving, that's it. And you just jump in and you float off, It's like, you cut to the chase much faster. You get there much, you don't waste time and talk and make excuses and be polite, and if anything, it tends to be quite amusing, actually. But, so, I mean, I love working with both of them. It was really fun. This is where he's basically taking over, and, as a young man, notwithstanding a very assertive young man, he has to take over from this guy without being a prick. Because not only that, it's like not very sympathetic for him to do that, except the guy really asks for it, because he calls him, now listen here, boy. That's fatal. You don't call a field operative boy, right? So that is the trigger, and he's been told that he can replace this guy and just take over the office, and that's what he does. He said, I'm going to function out of here. You guys aren't doing a very good job, and I have to take this over. We can't screw around any longer. So this is the takeover scene, where he's going to tell him basically leave the office and allow him to function. Hard to swallow.
Of a directive which tells me that I am to make myself useful to
The field operative both is kind of be romantically inclined. You think, wow, what an exciting James Bond job. It's not. It's really tough and very, very dangerous. And you've really got to believe you're going to make a difference to do that job. You can't think that this is akin to being, Rambo or Bond. It's another thing to get caught than it ain't Rambo and Bond. So these guys have to be passionate about what they're doing, and also probably have to believe in what they're doing. It will make a difference. If you examine it any other way, it just doesn't make sense, doesn't add up. It's not like they're overpaid. Are they doing it for excitement? You soon get over the excitement when a lot of it is actually just shoe leather. Like, the cop thing, the detective on the ground in I did American Gangster, there's a lot of shoe leather, months of shoe leather, and suddenly you get an opportunity to go for something, and then you get to it and it's not leading anywhere. And that is more common often than not. But suddenly also it does mean something, and if you're not paying attention, you're in a really dangerous zone immediately. And you've actually got to watch that as well.
The real headquarters of the Jordanian GID, as it's called, it's a more modern building. You'd see operatives who are enormously skillful. This is an intelligence service, as the Israelis will tell you, the British will tell you, that's among the best in the world.
Hani Pasha.
Pasha is an Ottoman.
So here we're going to see the head of Jordanian intelligence, Hani Pasha. The head of Jordanian intelligence is always known by the Ottoman honorific Pasha, or they pronounce it Basha as if it's got a B. The head of their secret service is always the Basha.
We'll leave that to
Hani's a composite of some people who've run the Jordanian intelligence service. I began work on this book in 2002, and I began by going to see the director of the CIA, George Tenet, in an interview for the Washington Post. And I asked him in the course of the interview who was doing the best job among our allies in helping us go after al-Qaeda and trying to help us penetrate that organization, get inside the tent. And he said without a moment's hesitation, the Jordanians, these guys are superstars, typical way Tenet talks. And he urged me to go talk to them. I said I was thinking about writing a novel set in the Middle East about getting inside al-Qaeda. So the next time I went to Jordan, I went to see the king, King Abdullah, who I've known and interviewed, and I told him that I'd really love to write a novel that had the flavor of real history and events, and would he be willing to help me get to know the head of his intelligence service, the head of the GID? And he arranged that, so I went to the real-life headquarters of the real-life version of Hani Pasha and began a series of conversations. And so what's in the book and what's in this film is drawn from a real effort to understand this service and how it operates. And some of the things that you'll see, I'll mention some of them later, are based on real cases, real things that people like the character Hani Pasha did.
here in Amman. I would need your help with surveillance, sir.
This way, he says, I've got one thing to add, never lie to me. Because he showed him material that he shouldn't have had, which means that they have functionaries in his city, because these are photographs from his city at what they call a safe house, that all these guys are potential fundamentalists. And so Hani's a little pissed off, as they say. This is the guy they're going to follow.
I have one rule. If we are to cooperate, my dear, never lie to me.
There's some great actors in the Arab community, and so I always go there. Ever since Kingdom of Heaven, I look for Arab characters. I look in the Arab community, and Saladin. We had Ghassan, who's one of the most important actors from Baghdad, but from Syria. There was a star in Egypt called Khalid. He played the Muslim fundamentalist, the scholar, the cleric. In this instance, all my cast here are from Morocco, or Israel, or Egypt, or the Middle East. Mark Strong isn't, funnily enough. He's from North London. But he did a great Arab, very elegant Arab.
What do you want to do with this guy? Just watch.
Vince actually also is the American functionary there. Vince Colosimo is the Australian actor who's known for actually quite a nice movie made in Australia with Anthony LaPaglia, Lantana. Yeah. He and LaPaglia were the stars of Lantana.
Who's this? Who just sat down?
It's one of our guys.
One of your guys?
What Ferris is doing in the scene is something CIA officers are trained to do. And training, picking out the surveillance and eluding it is essential to graduating. You don't get out of the farm, their training camp, without passing that tradecraft course. They send FBI agents after you off, and they'll stick you in a city like Washington, D.C., and you've got to figure out who's the FBI agent. And you'll have a very diverse group of FBI agents dressed in ways that make them real hard to identify. But guess what? They get pretty good at it. People speak in the military of the 5,000-mile screwdriver going from the Pentagon to Iraq or Afghanistan. Under Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, there was a tendency for total micromanagement. I mean, a commander could get orders telling him what to do, down to an amazingly small level. And I think CIA officers had the same problem. unless you give people some freedom to operate, you're just not going to get creative results. We know that in life. We know that in everything we do. If I didn't have freedom as a journalist to go out and explore stuff, if I had some idiot editor telling me what to do, demanding a progress report every hour, I'd never get anything done.
I remember one day when we were working on the script, we started talking about the dogs in Morocco, a particular memory of the dogs around the Casbah in Ouarzazate from Kingdom of Heaven, and Ridley got it in his head to have dogs in the film. It led to a terrific act of compression, because having decided that the meeting with the girl in the film was going to be because she was a nurse, the dogs led directly to the nurse and tightened up a good deal of the middle of the film thereby. You know, there's a thing, when Ridley starts talking about something, you know it's going to be in the picture.
The Wall Street Journal came to me in 1980. I was covering the Senate. I'd covered the CIA already. I'd covered the Justice Department. They said, "How would you like to go to the Middle East?" And I said, "But I don't know anything about it. I don't speak the language. I've never been there." And they said, "Yeah, you're perfect. That's what we want." You know, I was a kid. I was 29. I was dating a girl I was crazy about, and almost nobody thought I should do it. My family said, "No." And she said, "You really need to. This is the challenge of your lifetime." And she said that thinking that I'd leave, I'd be gone. And I thought, you know, she's right. This is the challenge of my lifetime. I got to do it. And then I thought, gee, she really must love me. She's willing to have me go do this, even at the cost of our relationship. So I said yes to the job, went to the Middle East, and I asked her to marry me. And she stayed behind in London. She worked for a computer company in London while I was off most of the time, in Beirut, Iraq, all those places. But that's how I got started back in 1980.
In David's book, there were two women, both American. Now, that's not very useful, because part of the whole story is supposed to be Ferris falling in love with culture and country he can never really be part of. And how better to get at that by having the love interest in the film being a woman he can't touch, and the relationship being one that will never be consummated. Ferris is alone. It's important for him to be alone. Begin alone. End alone.
Aisha is, for me, a magical character watching the movie, and I say that because she wasn't in the book. In the book, Roger Ferris was in transition from an unhappy marriage with a woman who just was very manipulative, and falling in love with an American woman who worked in a Palestinian refugee camp. And Ridley decided that he wanted to simplify that and have Ferris become interested in a woman of that world, not a woman who was interested in it, but who was of it. And so he found this quite remarkable Iranian actress who we're seeing in this scene. But she's a new character. I think the actress who plays her is an enormously gifted woman, and I'm so happy that Ridley has brought her into the world of Hollywood, the world of international cinema. I hope the Iranians understand how marvelous this is to have a first-rate Iranian actress in a big Hollywood movie playing across from Leo DiCaprio. But that's a big change from the book, and I think one that works. I went to see the film being shot in Washington. These scenes are in Washington. I went to see the film being shot, a scene we'll see later on the Mall downtown in Washington. And then I took my oldest daughter to Morocco, where most of the scenes that are in the Arab world are being shot. It was an incredible experience for me to watch Ridley on the set as the field commander, as it were. What interested me most, I think, is seeing when he involved himself personally in the process. Most things he left to this first-rate crew that he has. He trusts them. He lets them do it. He lets his cinematographer set up shots. But there are moments where he has to intervene, and he'll work through the scene. He'll take DiCaprio, he'll take Crowe, he'll redo it, he'll rethink it. There were a couple of key scenes that he redid on the spot from the way the script had been written that really worked powerfully. So that was a real pleasure for me. It's, you know, if you're a writer, this all happens inside your head. To see it happening in real space with hundreds of people surrounding the actors is just incredible.
The guy who was working for Ed Hoffman was the guy who was in the marketplace talking to that other guy. It nearly freaked him out. They picked him up and they brought him here. So he's going to show what you do. You basically get 100 lashes with a stick. He won't be able to sit down for a year. So they punish him and then lock him up. And He says, explain to Edward, tell Edward what you've seen. He said, I thought you didn't believe in torture, honey. He said, this isn't torture, this is punishment. Punishment, my dear. So they tie him down, strap him down, take your trousers down, strap him to the table and give him 100 of the best. I mean, you're absolutely pulp. I used to get it at school regularly. People were always horrified that I was caned, and I was caned. It was always my fault. But you know what? We'd walk away like with pride, because there'd be some bruises. So you'd walk away with pride because there were war wounds, you see. So the guys would think, wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I would never go and discuss it with my parents. Are you kidding? I'd probably get clipped because it was my fault.
Yeah, the passing of notes is very, very important, the low-tech communications. Because of the writer's strike, this was actually, I think this was the first day of shooting. And it's the only day of photography I saw. Because the writer's strike came almost immediately afterwards, I believe. But as usual, it was very impressive. Very impressive. Ridley's attention to detail and the general flow of things is just the most remarkable thing there is. And said something quite interesting. In one of the shots of the market from above, you could see the edge of a roof. And Ridley looked at the edge of the roof in the monitor and said, wasn't that supposed to be black? And someone said, well, we'll fix it in post, which is the standard comment of these days. And he basically said, no, you fucking won't, and sent somebody up there with a paint can to paint the roof black. You know, it hung up a little bit, but it was the difference was dollar value. Either way, the thing wasn't going to get into a shot unless it was painted black.
One thing that I thought about in writing the book that's carried forward in the movie is what would happen if almost random acts of terror began to spread in Europe, and that they weren't spectaculars, they were just pow, pow. Every day you had to wake up thinking, where's the bomb going to hit today? In other words, that it felt in Europe and then later in America the way it feels in Baghdad today. You go to a market, you look around, you're tense, you're frightened because you don't know if the person carrying milk has under her coat a suicide vest. I mean, what would that do if every place that we go, every act of life carried the risk of a terrorist attack? How would we fray as a society? That's what I was playing with.
This is the first piece of really insidious, interesting, if anything, kind of mafia behavior with logic of saying, I'm going to take you to see someone and I'll show you how I function. And so they're going to go out in the desert because they don't want to be looked upon, and somebody's been brought out in a truck who is a person that they know is close to Al-Qaeda. But because they have this person's mother in a flat where they've given a TV set, they've given a new sofa and armchairs and maybe cooking pots, and said, this all comes from your son. And so he's about to put his mother on the cell phone where she thinks he's bought her everything, and he hasn't. The point being, they are now very dangerous to him because they know where Mummy lives and they know where he lives. And it'll be, if he lets them down, take your pick. They'll start with one of them, which makes it very persuasive, especially Mummy. Start with your mum, work to your kids. By then you'll get the point. And there's no qualms about that. They just don't even think about it. It's how they control it. Your relationships make you vulnerable. We'll find in this film a relationship makes him vulnerable. That's what I like. It's not bleak, it's interesting, it's what it is. It is what it is, And half of what it is logical. It's very logical, that's what you do. If you were in this world, you would control that way. So here he is, he doesn't even know why he's there. He vaguely knows who this guy is, who's going to say to him, here, take this phone, it's your mother. And the mother's going, oh, my son, thank you for the furniture, thank you for the pots and pans, thank you for the TV set. And he feels like shit. And Honey says, don't worry, she won't know. He said, but when I call on you, when I need you, and I may not need you ever, but when I need you, I want you to act on my behalf. These guys, they sow the seeds of what I'd call infiltrators. People, they just put their finger or thumb on somebody saying, you're working for me now. And whenever I call you, I want you to come, I want you to do something for me. Or I want you to get me this piece of information.
Talk to your mother, handing a cell phone to a prospective recruit and saying, talk to your mother. That actually happened. This is one of the great stories of the Jordanian intelligence service. And someone very much like Hani found a terrorist who had access to a terrorist Al-Qaeda cell, walked in his door, handed him a cell phone and said, talk to your mother. And the dialogue that's in the movie taken from the book is pretty much how it happened. It's a great operation. I've disguised a number of details, but it illustrates how in real life you get the person who can get access, who can get inside the tent.
No. Come. Up.
It's not unusual to expect this kind of film to come at this point, but I'm just fascinated by the whole culture. And this kind of thing is still going on today when it's been going on since the 12th century, 13th century. The Crusades ran almost like 400 years. And I think a lot of the hatred obviously is so deep-seated, it goes back 1,000 years to our misbehavior and misdemeanors and terrible bloodbaths that were carried out then. And so I think it begins there. I think it's that far back. And then, of course, how we've misunderstood through ignorance and underestimated and taken things way too cheaply, sometimes almost free, for a century or more. And on the other hand, we're an entirely different religion. There couldn't be more counterpoint to theirs. So we're now paying the price. But like all these people, I mean, I know a lot of them, and I'm accepted. I get on easily and well. And that goes right through the whole community, from the so-called working class up to, you name it. I'm welcome. Just about understanding, sympathy, empathy, and not automatically regarding everyone, assuming everyone's the enemy, and including them. We have all kinds of predetermined ideas about who they are. One of the most dangerous things, of course, is xenophobia, fear of foreigners. And I think I travel so much that it's become part of my DNA that I'm pretty at ease wherever I go. And what I know is that it's all up to you as to how you handle yourself with them. And the more open you are, it's simplistic, but the more open you are, for the most part, you're probably going to be all right. But that's why I'm interested in this thing, this crossing over these two cultures. I mean, it could be far more extreme West than this. And even Hani Salam, on the appearance of being westernized, but he's not at all. He could easily be walking around in a beautiful Arab robe, and he has all the old fashions, a bad way of putting it, the classical intuition, probably, of a great Berber tribesman who have been, traders for centuries and are very good dealers and very good at reading people and have codes and standards. And if you go against that, you'll be in trouble.
Karami. Now, we develop these assets to use them.
Russell called me when he came to Washington when we're starting to shoot, and he said, Dave, where's Hoffman from? And I said, I don't know. I think maybe he's from Massachusetts. I thought he might be from kind of Worcester or Springfield, some working class town in Massachusetts. He said, no, he's not. He's from Arkansas. He had decided that he was from Arkansas. He'd been listening to tapes of Bill Clinton and of Senator Jim Webb, who's not from Arkansas but has an accent. And he was sitting in his hotel room listening to these tapes and trying to get the accent the way he wanted it. And I think the character he's created here is just, to me, unforgettable. He embodies all the things that I wanted this character to have, but then adds whole additional layers. It just shows you what a great actor can do. I wonder how long it took him to take the weight off once he put it on.
Real intelligence operations, they remain secret forever. You Americans, you are incapable of secrecy because you are a democracy. Now,
Every chief of every other intelligence service, if he was sitting with a real-life version of Ed Hoffman, would say pretty much what Hani Pasha just said. You Americans are incapable of secrecy. People are just so sick of seeing operations blown and ending up in the newspapers. I suppose I'm not somebody who should talk about that because I'm in the newspaper business and I want more information rather than less, but it drives other intelligence services nuts.
Now, you guys might have invented algebra, but we're the guys that found out how to use it.
We need to have good reasons in terms of serving our readers for publishing information about anything. I think just the notion that you're going to willy-nilly blow secrets is hard to justify. We have a rule at the Washington Post that was enunciated by our wonderful late chairman, Katharine Graham, who said that whenever you're going to write about intelligence operations, you have a responsibility as a journalist to inform the agency that you're going to write about and let them make their case that this is dangerous, that this will get people killed, that this will do real damage to U.S. national security, and then we reserve the right as independent journalists to make a decision about whether to publish. Usually, the arguments, if it's really a case of abusive practices, let's say, rendition of terrorists, secret prisons to hold terrorists, torture of terrorist suspects, there were strong arguments made not to publish those things. But in the end, we decided that the public needed to know. But in my career, there have been some really tough decisions. There have been some things that I put in the paper that people didn't want there happily. Not happily, but I'm glad that as far as I know, the disastrous consequences haven't ensued. It's very hard for a democracy to run an intelligence service effectively. That's just a fact. Intelligence thrives in secret. It requires secrecy. A democracy abhors secrecy and abhors the products of secrecy. And it's just a tension that's not going to be resolved. We're going to live with the tension. I just hope we'll have a strong democracy and a strong intelligence service at the same time. Al-Qaeda uses secrecy, but interestingly, Al-Qaeda, if you look at bin Laden and Zawahiri's tapes, Al-Qaeda has got the media bug too. They can't resist commenting on things. Because sometimes you watch these tapes of bin Laden and you think he wants to be Brian Williams and comment on the news. It's bizarre. But there is this media world and that spins so fast, it draws the most unlikely people in. But the Al-Qaeda lives on and will be destroyed by the mass media. I think that the abhorrence that decent Muslims feel as they look at these tactics and the consequences for their people, for their world, for the things they care about, as those images become more pervasive, I think they sicken people. I mean, that's my faith as a journalist, is that people, whoever they are, from whatever culture, react to real things in similar ways. We're all abhorred by grotesque violence.
It doesn't look like there's a lot of action here, and funnily enough, it's very, very dynamic. It moves really well because you're getting lots of information. So there's a lot of pressure all the time, which then breaks out sometimes into some kind of solution. Here, this is where this goes wrong, where the skip who works for the American embassy thinks he's going to apprehend this guy and he's going to lose him. Comes up behind him, there's four of them, they're going to take him. Van's cornering him like that, and he's saying sorry, and literally squeezes through that gap. We nearly squashed him, actually. He got nipped between the pipe and the corner, but he was all right, and they blew it. So now the story's out. That guy's now going to leave. They're going to go back to the safe house saying, I was followed, I was nearly arrested. The safe house is going to empty and burn itself up, going to burn it to the ground. So he's going to be in trouble in a minute and thrown out and go back to the United States.
I loved watching Leo and the actress who plays Aisha on the set. It was just fascinating to see them interact. She was there with her husband, a very interesting Iranian man. And you just had a sense of people from two cultures, both quite young, both really attractive, talking, actor and actress, much as these characters are talking in their roles as CIA officer and nurse.
Bang, out. And so this woman is very, very moral. They can't even touch. You can't even shake hands. This Christian Amanpour did a kind of bit of a documentary on Iran, and was interviewing a woman, a doctor, middle-aged woman who was a doctor, who was a woman who was actually trained in Colorado and ended up back in Iran as a Muslim, and was into women's rights, and the women's rights in Iran are pretty slender and very limited and very guided by, I would say, very old ground rules. I'd say medieval. And they were talking about somebody who had been stoned recently to death because she'd been seen on the street unaccompanied with a friend, who was a male friend, and she should have been there with family and chaperones and wasn't, and they weren't even touching, but she was stoned. So Christian said, well, that's extraordinary. How often does that happen? She said, oh, not often. She said, what? You mean it happens? Yeah. She said, probably about 5 in the last 25 years. That's shocking that can still happen. So in a funny kind of way, it's so much part of the culture, that's something we don't understand and clearly should be changed. The freedom of what women and their rights, what they feel they must do, and equality. And so this goes in the subtext in their story. So in the story, they don't actually touch, which is kind of interesting. So he's on his best behavior. He's very interested in her, and actually best described as gentlemanly about the whole process, which kind of is refreshing, you know. So he asks permission here to see her again, which she sounds very funny. Then he asks in Arabic, which she thinks is hysterically funny, and which is fundamentally saying, in your time and with your permission.
A man is not his job.
This scene is based on many, many experiences I've had over many years sitting in cafes in poor parts of town across the Arab world, and just the fear that you have, that you're so vulnerable. It's obvious that you're a foreigner, obvious that you're an American, and you are aware of all the eyes looking at you and all of the hatred and fear that's focused on you. And you're grateful for people like Aisha, who bring you into that world and try to make you feel comfortable, even with all those staring eyes. I think that scene is entirely realistic. I think every bit of it is real. Her pleasure and surprise that he speaks the language, that he's making the effort to connect, that he's being careful and deferential, and that he wants to see her again. I think that's realistic. She knows that he's being taken away by the Jordanian intelligence service, the Mukhabarat, it's called in Jordan. It's a pervasive fact of life. You go with young people, you sit in a bar, and one of the games they'll play is who here is from the Mukhabarat, who's listening to us, who's watching us. But people are frightened because there's so many of them. So when she sees that he's being taken away by this man, it evokes all these fears that she has, and also makes her wonder, who is this man that he'd be taken away by the Jordanian Secret Service?
So, our operative, Leo, has actually misdemeanor on the worst possible level. He engaged with a local person on an emotional level. He's not yet fully engaged, but he's engaged enough to make him vulnerable with Hani and probably therefore Hoffman. So and my theory is, particularly in this kind of real world, rather than the movie world, of this kind of, in this field, anybody engages emotionally becomes vulnerable because their nearest and dearest can become a target, which in fact is where the film will head. She'll become targeted, and because of that, that will make him vulnerable. In this instance, we don't know yet whether he's going to be used or not at this particular moment, but if you're paying attention at this point, you certainly feel that Ferris deserves to be punished because he, as far as the Arab Hani is concerned, he has betrayed his trust. But unfortunately, it's part of the field operator's job is that he can trust no one. And by trusting no one, he might feel safer. Whereas with this man, Hani Pasha, Probably if he'd engaged in his trust, he might have been safer. But who would know that? That's part of the interesting thing about the film, is who do you trust? And the safest route is, again, trust no one.
This was filmed in Rabat on a hillside in a poor neighborhood. You can't see them, obviously, but there were hundreds and hundreds of people lined up watching this. It's a great place to shoot movies. Morocco is, the film business is thriving there, and people know it's crucial. There's a lot of security. People take precautions. They in the end, what the protection is, that the Moroccan people know that this is a gold mine for the country, and that they're not going to let people mess around with it and jeopardize it. But there's a lot of security there. Ridley insists on shooting in places that a lot of directors wouldn't want to go. The shots that you've been watching were taken in very poor parts of town. They're not dressed up to look like poor parts of town. They're poor parts of town. I think, again, that's part of what makes him a great director, is the ability to get visual imagery that is so raw. I think of Blade Runner and how Ridley made Blade Runner look like this landscape you'd never seen. Only it was a landscape of your imagination. And he's doing that a little bit here.
This scene here was actually shot just outside of Rabat, in one of those outlying villages. I don't know what this part was, but this was a rubbish dump, as you can see. There's no real structure yet to collect all that rubbish. It's changing. It's changing for the good fast. Morocco is a great place, great community. The people are great, and everything's different. The food's different, the smells are different. It's very exotic. And I always say this will be the last time, but I'm sure it won't. A lot of people don't like Rabat because it's not as picturesque as they would expect. It's basically the center of government for Morocco. I think it's not the financial center, but it's like the business center. Whereas Casablanca, I think, is the financial center. Rabat is where the main palace is. I think the parliament is in Rabat. And so I'm in Rabat, and they let me do anything. And so it's great.
This is a key scene in the film, as you'll see, and this is a scene that Ridley redid on the spot in a way that made it much more powerful.
You're gonna be back in Jordan before you know it. Back with your little Jordanian piece of poontang that you think I don't know about.
Listening to Russell Crowe trying to figure out how to say poontang with the right accent and going over it again and again was one of the pleasures of watching this film being made. What Ridley wrote into this was kicking over the chair. That wasn't in the original version, and he thought we need something that's visual and dramatic that shows Ferris how pissed off he is. And the fact that Hoffman, for all his power, just takes it. In every one of my novels, there's been a character named Hoffman. It's a common thread through my books. People always ask me, who is Hoffman based on? And they'll name this famous CIA officer or that one. And the truth is, the inspiration for the character really comes from my best friend in college and my best friend to this day, who looks an awful lot like Russell Crowe does in this movie. He has a buzz cut, has a big, hefty body. So this is real model, oddly enough, is someone who's, in his case, a professor of constitutional law today. This is a moment of revelation for Roger Ferris, in which he realizes we've been driving ourselves nuts trying to penetrate Al-Qaeda, and we failed. But what if we tricked Al-Qaeda into thinking that we'd done the thing that we're in fact unable to do? What if we were able to make them paranoid and looking over their shoulder in every moment? And this idea came from my own reading over many years of the literature on deception in intelligence operations. The movie and the book are called Body of Lies, and it's a memory of one of the great deceptions of World War II, in which the British floated a dead body ashore off the coast of Spain, carrying what purported to be communications to the British High Command about where they were going to land in Europe. They were going to land according to these secret letters in the Aegean. In fact, they were going to land in Sicily, and they thought the Germans knew they were coming at Sicily, and how could they trick them into thinking that something else was happening? So they floated this body ashore. This case is known as The Man Who Never Was. There's a marvelous old movie made about it, and a book by the same name people can read if they're interested. But The Man Who Never Was an attempt to deceive this adversary and make him think that something was true that wasn't. And I've always been interested in this as a technique of intelligence. And in this case, I thought, what if we could trick Al-Qaeda and make them afraid that we had done the thing that we can't do, and how could we use that and manipulate it, play with it? In the book, there is a body, a dead body that's used, but Ridley felt sensibly that he needed to be more economical on the plot. But this is a moment in which Ferris really begins to take charge and to grow as intelligence officer. Hani says that he really is a devious SOB in a way that he hadn't fully appreciated. And now we're watching the sort of cell within Hoffman's cell that's doing these deception operations. This odd British character who's got a parrot and all his TV screens is a man who's running a layer of operations unknown even to CIA, carrying out some of Hoffman's and now Ferris's projects. People ask me, is there anything like this for real at the CIA? And I've often answered, I hope so. I mean, I hope that we're in the deception business because I think it's valuable, it's useful when you have a really, really dangerous adversary. But I don't know. Obviously, I mean, no outsider should know.
What fascinated me about this is, even a layman can see how easily information can be controlled, how information can go out of control. In the internet age, there's a phenomenon where the first thing said is the thing that sticks forever. You can really use the internet to manipulate appearances. And if you can manipulate appearances, you can get away with anything. What I'm afraid of is that one of these days, somebody's going to really figure out how to play that piano.
I didn't want to have the usual James Bond special room where you have the professor in the James Bond shows them all the new tricks and the new gigs and the new bombs and the new devices, and I get a funny feeling it's no longer like that today. Whilst there will be rooms like that, I think there's probably globally a lot of small operatives who fish stuff out of the ether, if that's the word for it, and plant stuff in the ether and can control things that way. Particularly if your plan is about paranoia, that's what the plan is. The plan is creating the possibility of a challenge to this person that you want to surface, and if you put enough things in his way, he might surface. And therefore, your more global ears will be watching for that moment to say, aha, I think he's in Toronto, or I think he's in Karachi, or this voice is very familiar, this is out of Sydney, Australia, or very simply, it might be in Jordan. So they don't know where he is, they just want him to surface. And partly, it wasn't for economic reasons, I just thought, I don't want to do one of these big black rooms with screens and all that kind of thing. Some disguise is minimal's better. I was kind of stuck out. Normally I'd have shaved his beard off, but I couldn't do it here because it had to happen for various reasons in the middle of the movie. And so a beard it was, so somebody's more bearded. We blonded him up a little bit, so if anyone says, what do you look like? And he said, well, he kind of had blonde hair, and you know what, I think it was dyed, right? And so this is a slight adjustment that way, but you don't have to have false nose and glasses, particularly when you don't think you're being, or don't know that you're actually being worked over.
Sketches and a rough bid by, say, next Thursday?
All of this was to be in Dubai, and I think Dubai became quite nervous because when I go through Dubai, I have to deal with the sheikh or the king, and when you go through the king, he reads these things directly, and then he passes it to his Minister of the Interior. Once that happens, you're not going to get him. So I already had to work out a way of not going to Dubai, but actually having it in the movie. I think we have too many references to not discoloring Dubai in any shape or form, simply saying it's a tax shelter place of the world, which it is. So it attracts a lot of big cross-section of people. I would say some dodgy. And so that's true. And so all in all, I think they felt it discolored them, so they didn't want it. They didn't want to risk it. And I always give them a script that is absolutely accurate. I don't send them a script with lots of scenes removed and then do the scenes later. I don't ever like to do that to them. I would keep it absolutely straight and above board. So I couldn't do it, so I had to go and fake Dubai in Rabat with some digital work. So whilst we think we're in Dubai here, we're actually not. We're in Rabat. In fact, Rabat is a place I shot Black Hawk Down and some of Kingdom of Heaven. So I'm well known in Rabat.
It's the first thing that people these days try to do is get a hold of somebody's computer. You should just be aware, if you travel abroad and you're an American business person who has important information, you leave your computer in the hotel room, there is a very large chance that the hostile intelligence service is going to try to get a hold of it. I mean, I just have assumed in all the years I travel that anything I leave in my hotel room, it's going to be known to other people, so just be aware of that. I think most Americans are paranoid about the NSA or the CIA listening in on their conversations, and I don't like the idea of that. But I'm so used to the reality that other intelligence services are listening into my conversations everywhere I go that I have to say, worry about the American side is secondary. It's not nothing, but it's a secondary concern. They keep secrets about how they do this, but their voice recognition is part of it. The code words, you'll have a watch list of names of interest. You'll select for those, filter for them, and then you'll have a smaller universe, and then you'll look at within that and look at the ones that are of interest. The key is when you get a link, when you get a circuit that's got hot intelligence on it, staying with that, and that people will monitor that real time, around the clock. And the thing that drives people crazy in that world is when something that is providing crucial intelligence, a real link between people who are conducting operations, is blown, when they just throw away that cell phone and take another. And this adversary, as the movie says, these are people who keep changing their cell phones or don't use them at all because they're wise to what we can do. They know that there's somebody like Roger Ferris in your hotel room right now trying to get your phone numbers. This scene reminds me of coming back to my hotel room once in Syria, 1981 maybe, more than 25 years ago, and finding a bunch of technicians working on my television set, which had been working fine. There was no problem with my television set. It happened my wife had come to visit me, and we wanted to relax, and these guys just kept on doing whatever they were doing. They were going to finish the job. I have no idea what they were installing or uninstalling, and then they left, and I said to my wife, I guess we should be aware that, we're not really alone here.
I wouldn't say it's a rule about Russell, but I did notice as he swarmed into the character of Hoffman, a lot that was subtext in the text became text, like his children. It worked out well.
This kind of story always fascinates me because it's, in the best sense of the word, like John le Carré. A lot of it's insidious process and procedure, paranoid, trusting no one. And that's what I found was very good about Ignatius's book. He just seemed to get right into the underbelly of the process of these guys who are actually functionaries who have to function like this. In a way, put themselves on the line all the time. These are the people we don't hear about. They just disappear. Or, if they're lucky, they go into retirement. Or, better still, they go and get an office job at the end. But I think once you're in the field doing this kind of thing, it's so adrenalizing, I doubt you'd ever want an office job at the end of this. Head of GID, which he's playing, is like the equivalent of head of Mossad, or head of MI5, or kind of head of very high up in the CIA. I mean, the CIA is such a massive department that you probably haven't got the equivalent in other countries. But you've got, like I don't know how the CIA, the tree functions in the CIA. You've got number one, there's probably like 4 number 2s, and so on and so forth. Whereas in England, I think it's head of MI5, and then the family tree goes down. Mossad and Jordanian, because it's smaller, it's going to be a smaller tree. So number 1 is also a functionary.
My sister's going to want to meet you.
Your sister?
Yeah, my sister looks...
We speak sometimes about a novel of education. It's an old-fashioned term, the German Bildungsroman. And there's a way in which this is a story of education, the education of Roger Ferris as an intelligence officer in the most extreme and violent world, and what he learns, and what the arc of his education is. And Aisha's part of it, Hani's part of it, Hoffman's part of it. Buying sweets in the Arab world is a ritual. If you show up somewhere in the Arab world and you haven't bought some nice cookies or flowers, you should just go home. You don't even try. It is really bad manners to show up without a gift.
Aisha's from Iran. She's pretty, important, a very important actress. I think one of the most important actress in Iran. So, and she'd done a lot of theatre and some of their important films. I didn't realize in Iran they make 135 movies a year. And the problem is there's nowhere to run them. So most of these films, all these films almost all go to video. So then they run on video and therefore all banned. Which in a funny kind of way is quite a good thing because I think it becomes art. It doesn't matter who I'm dealing with or where I've been shooting, and even if they don't kind of understand me, even with an interpreter, you can get a connection instantly. They get it immediately. So it's very gratifying that when you're working in countries with people who, that's where they're from and they engage, and that's where you literally feel this common language. It's very nice. Here, the girl who plays her sister is an Israeli woman who actually is the sister of Marwan, who's the bodyguard of Hani. But really good, constantly surprised by the quality of acting and performance. It kind of crosses borders, the idea of humor and drama and the acting community. It's a common language,
So, Mr. Fairs, how long are you in Amman?
Well, I think I'm gonna be for a while. I hope so anyway.
The woman who plays Aisha's sister and the anger that she feels, which is so evident in this scene, I think is very powerful. It's something entirely new that Ridley and Bill Monahan put in the story, but I think it really works because it takes us inside the personal feelings that people in the Arab world have when they're sitting with an American, what they feel, what they want to ask, what they're angry about.
But what does that mean? Forgive my ignorance.
It means.
It means that
Every school in the Arab world is teaching English, even in parts of the Arab world where French used to be the second language, like Lebanon and Syria. Today it's English. An American can get by with English increasingly for the basics of life. Everybody knows that English is your ticket out, is your ticket to connect with the larger global economy, to make money, to have a good living.
And we understand that
in one of my early conversations with Ridley, we talked about a phrase, again, that I'd heard from a CIA officer that fascinated him. I told him that, we had our problems with an insurgency in Iraq, but increasingly what people were focused on at the agency was what they call the POIs. And Ridley said, what's the POI? And I said, it's a pissed off Iraqi. And that was their code for the average Iraqi man or woman on the street and what they felt. And what we're seeing in the scene with Aisha's sister is the average POJ, pissed off Jordanian, a person who's not a terrorist, not a member of a cell, but who's angry and upset and having this very awkward, difficult conversation with the American Roger Ferris. But I think Ridley focused on this idea of the POIs, kept repeating that, thinking, well, that's really interesting. How do we connect with that? I think that's one of the little threads that came together in his mind. This was before I'd written this book, and we were talking about another project that made him think, oh, maybe we can play with this and experiment with it.
In America. Oh yeah? Yeah. Tell her I'll switch passports with her. It'll make us both happy.
This part of the story rings totally true in that for people to invite you in their home happens more than you might think. And once you have been invited into the home of someone in this culture, the relationship changes, and there's an intimacy and a connection that's very powerful.
What do you mean?
What's nice here is what is about to happen here is real. That they don't shake hands, she can't touch, and she had to have a chaperone, which is the sister. Otherwise, it would be absolutely not on. And also, that's why she has a head covering, because she has to have, out of respect in the household, being Muslim, she has to have a head covered. And in his presence, she would never be able to do that, where she'd take him into her apartment, have a cup of tea. That would be not on. So at the end of this, even though she is kind of engaging with him, when he offers his hand, at the end she can't take it. Not only that, he's clearly not Arabic, even though at a quick glance he might be. But his whole body language is not Arabic. They're looking down, there's this sense of disapproval. But I use that in the film because I think, A, it happens, B, it kind of shows respect to the culture, which I think was really cool, that they couldn't actually get any closer than that. And that's what's interesting about it, and that's what's attractive about the relationship. So that then later, I had that relationship evolve, which would take her onto a little more dangerous ground, but never, ever any idea of engagement in anything sexual at all. It kept it right in its place, so it's always absolutely correct, which ironically is what makes him more and more attracted to the woman. Because what he does, he respects her outlook on that and her religion, and out of that he is endearing himself to her. We could do a little bit of that here, couldn't we?
Garland.
Yeah.
All right, now pull up an Arabic keyboard and write.
Garland stands for a whole network in the book of people who were doing these secret off-book operations as Hoffman and Ferris ran their deception. They were operating underground under one of the CIA parking lots, a group that they called Mincemeat Park, which is actually a reference to the famous case, The Man Who Never Was, which was called in code by the British Operation Mincemeat. So this was in homage to it. But Garland is made to stand for this more elaborate version of the book. In the book, the CIA operatives were imagining all the things that Al-Qaeda needs: travel, services, ability to move money from one country to another, and trying to put themselves in a position to supply those services without Al-Qaeda ever understanding that it was being used to pick up the little bits of intelligence that would allow them to crack the network. And so that the scenes we're seeing are standing for what I was imagining was a larger effort to manipulate and deceive.
Hello there, Mr. Siddiqui. It's Brad Scanlon. Well, I'm fine. Thanks so much for asking, but we've got a bit of a problem. Yes, you see, our chief engineer, who's based out of Ankara.
The movie has to be reimagined in the director's mind, and you can't possibly keep everything that's in the book. And I think all of the essential turns in the story that I wanted to tell, Ridley's story keeps, and then so that the arc of this story, to use the word we often do when talking about a movie, is preserved. There were things I loved in the book that I hope readers of the book will love that are not in the movie, and there are things in the movie that weren't in the book that I wish I'd been that smart. But you just have to accept that these are two different things. That it's like the process of reimagining real life in a novel in the first place, and then reimagining it a second time when it becomes a movie, and just to let each be what it is.
When the strike is done, he'll post another message taking responsibility for our little event. You got that? After that, hopefully a buzz of messages will then pass among jihadist networks announcing the Brothers of Awareness as a new player and our Siddiqui as its leader. You got that? All right, Ferris. Thank you.
I've visited Incirlik on my way in and out of Iraq. The security's so tight there that almost impossible, except for a deception like what Ferris is engineering here to make it appear as if the base has been hit.
A massive bomb ripped through the bachelor officers' quarters at 3 o'clock this morning, quickly engulfing it in flames. No one yet has claimed responsibility for the attack, but terror experts are already speculating this is the work of a new, much more sophisticated and much better financed offshoot of Al-Qaeda.
What Ferris has been trying to do here with Garland is to create a web of illusion that will be powerful enough that it will trick al-Salim, trick Al-Qaeda into thinking that this other group is real and threatens them in some way, that it's out there and they don't know enough about it. And I suspect that in this world of intelligence operations, we and our allies do have some very clever things that take place, a lot of them in cyberspace, that are feints that take bits of information, embellish them, manipulate them, skew them, trying to get to men like the Salsaline and condition their decisions. It's the trickiest part of secret war.
I can't say it's been real, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, there were so many riches in David's book, such fantastic thriller plot lines, that the whole job was to cut down, to compress, to compress, to compress. And Ridley was adamant about compressing. And compression is really the soul of any art form, you know. And Ridley's particularly good at it. He knows what you can sell with an image, or what you can sell, as David Lean always knew, with the dynamic and the power of transition from one scene to the next. People like to talk about films and act structure, and I've never figured out why. The act structure has nothing to do with cinema, which is a straight line of one scene succeeding another. The three-act structure actually came from the Victorian theatre, where they had extravagant scene changes and had to have lengthy pee breaks for women in complicated underwear. It's got nothing to do with drama. Of course, all the courses will tell you that the act structure is terribly important. I sometimes wonder if the people who say that have ever written a film or have ever really watched one.
The term of art for Mr. Siddiqui is unwitting asset.
The downside of these websites and the internet is that. There's a lot of bad stuff, isn't there? Because there's no control on it. And you can do what you want, and you can say what you want. And if you're careful, there's no government. You can put a governor on to stop them tracing you, except at the government level they can trace you, right? But then that's like finding who's calling up, so you've got to keep somebody on the phone to actually find out where he's coming from, what's his number. Which apparently is quite a complex thing, is to track it down to who is this. Unless you've got an infrastructure completely set up for that. So then now you have the beginning of his paranoia and fear.
We have people who were spotters, when I say we, I mean the CIA and the friendly intelligence services it operates with, who were spotting every day in radical mosques around the world, in cells. There are Muslim clerics who are appalled by what they're seeing, who help us out by saying this one and this one and this one, or moving toward possible involvement in terrorist activities. We have various kinds of surveillance that can detect who's attending meetings. We have people who really study the process of radicalization, some very gifted academics who are working for the CIA who've written books when they were professors, now they're inside the government, looking at what happens, the process. It's almost like joining a cult, and what triggers it, what events in your life make you vulnerable to recruitment, all so that we might be able to intervene through our friends and block that process of recruitment. But this, as the U.S. has focused more and more on this adversary, we've gotten more sophisticated in thinking about who are the people you need to talk to, where are the places you need to be. You know, if you were going to try to plant people long term, you'd need to have relationships with mosques and networks of clerics. And you'd have to let them run a long time. I think that's the thing that people need to understand, is that for these things to ripen can take 5, 8, 10 years even. And all that time you just have to let them go.
Who the damn heck is Omar Siddiqui?
Yeah. Listen, I made a decision, Ed. I'm bringing him in.
Who?
Omar Siddiqui. That's who.
Oh, come on. No.
What we know is that bin Laden and Zawahiri, his deputy, were increasingly angry about Zarqawi's tactics. They thought that they were alienating people, that Zarqawi was too bloodthirsty. There's a communication that was intercepted that I believe is genuine, in which Zawahiri is really reaming Zarqawi for his activities. There's another intercepted message in which Zarqawi defends himself and what he's doing. So it's plausible that they would have gotten so furious that they would have taken action. What I'm told is that some key help in identifying the person who then identified Zarqawi, where it said where he was, were Jordanian intelligence officers on the ground in Iraq. So, in that sense, if that's true, if that story is true, and I think it is, it illustrates the reality behind this movie. A CIA officer would be very careful in real life about opening fire in the streets of Amman, because he would create a flap that would get the CIA in so much trouble it would be very hard for it to operate. That's not to say it wouldn't ever happen, but it would make people nervous.
This town has got all these locations. It's like I hardly moved out of the town. Everything where he's about to die is in the town, you know, like 15 minutes from here. That's why I keep going back there. There's so many great locations. Again, the thing of should you show him or should you not show him? Should you show Al-Saleen or not show Al-Saleen? There was always that question, that the guy did so well that I figured that we should show him. Intellectual, almost clerical in terms of his intellect. Never showing himself to the person who's being questioned. You never know.
Siddiqui is a dead man. That's why Ferris was trying to rescue him, knowing that he would be in this situation, and the vulnerability that he would face. I mean, Ferris increasingly is troubled by the moral dimensions of what he's doing, the way in which his actions put other people at risk. And I think that's another important part of the character of Ferris, that he goes from being a user like Ed Hoffman, who doesn't even think about using other people, doesn't even think when he puts the bullet in the head of that man in the beginning, to somebody who does care about the consequences, who sees the Siddiqui dead on that hillside with the dogs around him. And that's part of the story that we're watching. It bothers him. He's a CIA officer, but that doesn't mean he has a right to put other people at risk for no reason.
I was going to put Ed Hoffman never in an office. I said no offices. We even took it away. I never even had a set for Ed Hoffman. So his set would be his kitchen, his back garden, his kids' school, a car, a restaurant. He's a complete mobile functionary who, because of that, is always eating.
That's right.
He said, maybe I should put some weight on. I said, sure. Put on the glasses and the false hair and the full deal, and they really feel they're functioning when, I know Russell likes to get his teeth into a good accent, so he really loves to do his homework on that. It's a challenge. And if it's contributive towards the character, then it makes all the sense in the world. Same with Leo. Loves to say what accent, so he works on this accent subtly, whereas Hoffman did a little bit of Texas and a little bit of Arkansas. Kind of a mix of the two. You know who that was.
Don't you dare tell me I am not fucking thinking straight.
We shot this in the military hospital, and this being the other side of the, let's say, Virginia, or the back entrance or the back balcony on the CIA. And it was a building just outside of Washington. Good talking scenes with good information. If done right, the dynamics are really good because you're constantly getting new information all the time. It's my job to keep that alive, so I've got to keep everything moving all the time. That's part of the challenge. Because, dynamics aren't necessarily action. Dynamics are, to me, I always, say, are new information, where you're being given new information based on a central theme, and so you can relate that to the central theme. That's real theatre, that's real dynamics. It's not necessarily about rolling cars and crashing vehicles and things like that.
And now this exquisite sense of having put this beautiful woman, Aisha, who took care of him, who took him into her house, who opened her heart to him a little bit, whose hand he hasn't touched, but in a sense whose heart he's touched, that she is in the most extreme jeopardy because of his actions. This is a nightmare for him.
So now he's being fully used. From this moment on, he's being fully manipulated. And the manipulation is working perfectly because his assumption is that the bad guy's got him. He never dreams that it's not the bad guys, it's somebody else.
I think it's important that you believe that Ferris has come to care about her enough that he would take extreme actions to try to help her. And I think that we've seen enough to understand why he'd do that. But I mean, again, it's layered on so many other things that have been troubling him as this movie moves forward. Think of the pile of bodies that have been stacked up as he goes his way, recruiting people, running operations, all these dead people who are trying to help him do his thing. And finally, it just begins to snap here. He sees the blood, and he knows that she is now, this lovely, innocent woman is now at risk, and it torments him.
And then I think that the investment in how Hani functions at the very beginning of the movie in the desert scene, how that pays off, I think would be quite interesting, because it's one of those things where you've forgotten about that investment. Like, I bet Hani hasn't forgotten about the investment, because Hani may have 300 people like that who he may use at some time or never. But you'll have their phone number. When you suddenly have something that relates to this person being able to help you, you call them up saying, help me, otherwise you're in trouble. So that's a very kind of press gang, almost gangster way, almost mafia way of making people function for you. They put their thumb on you, say do it or else.
I love this scene. I think this scene is the moral center of this movie. This is the moment in which Ferris really becomes someone different, and in ways that we don't yet understand, in which Hani takes control of the story that we're watching. DiCaprio's the revelation for me. When I was trying to imagine Roger Ferris, who's a CIA officer who's tough but also has a core of idealism that is going to grow and grow through the story, I have to be honest. I saw it in terms of the words on the page and the description of the character, but there's a way in which Leo has made that person real, even for the author, in a way that just wasn't true before.
Leo constantly surprised me as an actor. I mean, I knew I was going to get something good, but he always raised the bar, and I hadn't worked with him before, and I knew, of course, Russell Crowe does that, but Leo's really excellent, and as I say, constantly I was surprised by. At the end of every day, it was something different that I hadn't really expected, which is kind of what you're looking for. I like to be surprised, and often that doesn't happen. That's why I like working with Russell, because Russell surprises you all the time. Funny little things. It's an accumulative effect of things. It's not necessarily ever something spectacular. It might be, but for the most part, it's emphasis, beautiful emphasis. It's artistic emphasis is where you lie the biggest surprises. He goes that way instead of going that way. Instead of going high, he goes low. And it makes sense. It's always driven emotionally.
Okay, thanks God you are calling. I have a question to make sure you are you, please. Fine.
Alex Witt is the cameraman, and I'd worked with Alex since he was my second unit director and cameraman since Thelma and Louise in 1990. And I've had him on everything, and I always thought this time, and it never happened, and then I thought this time, and this is his first camera. Did great. Alex is a very good operator. I always like cameramen who operate. I think there's something wrong if you don't operate in your camera, unless you can't, unless something's wrong. But I always think operating is very important, because I came from operating. And I don't now, but sometimes I like to get my hands on it. But it is really one of the best jobs on the floor. When you have your eye to the viewfinder, it's the proscenium of like the theatre. And so not only does it focus you on the actor, it gives you the blinkers you want. You blink it to watch what's going on. So anyone making a film, I would urge them, if they can, is to operate. You may make a few mistakes initially, but I mean, if you've got a good eye. If you haven't got a good eye, forget it. But operating is both very great fun and very challenging. And I never left the set or ever left the dolly when I was working on the first few movies. I'd sit in the dolly all day, watching what was going on through the camera, whether we were relighting or set build, moving the set or sitting thinking about what I'm going to do, I'd always be on that camera. And I was told actors don't like that, and it's absolutely contradiction to that. They do like it. They like, because they feel there's a communion, where no one could be closer than someone watching them through that glass. I've discovered more often than not they really like it, and they say they like it.
At this point, Ferris is believing that Hoffman has the tricks to save him, has the tricks to follow him. I think he would do this even if he wasn't under the eye of Hoffman and the satellites and the technology, because he's so passionate about helping Aisha. But at this point, he believes he is not necessarily taking a mortal risk. But I think Ferris has really jumped out of that kind of calculation. He's already in a space where he's thinking in a different way. He's not stacking up probabilities that Hoffman can track him every step. He's in a different space. He's looking for Uncle Sam. Hey, do you see me? Have you got me? The interesting part about Ferris is that he accepts and really depends on all the technology, even though he's not a technologist himself. He's a field operative. He's a man comfortable with people, with the language, with a gun. But he's surrounded by surveillance, satellites, overhead reconnaissance of various kinds. Through the movie, you see overhead reconnaissance, and you see people watching operations go down. You know, people say that's a little bit unrealistic, but in truth, we have the capability to do that, and we use it. Folks like me on the outside will never know exactly how much, but they do have those capabilities for real.
Now this bit, with the cars going around and round, this is another superb act of compression from Ridley. Deceiving Ed with his Predator view in the CIA headquarters could have taken up scene after scene. It could have taken up 10 whole minutes of film to get across the fact that technology was blinded and Ferris was screwed. This simply popped into Ridley's head. Use the cars out in the desert and raise dust. And this comes directly from experience in the desert he was going to be shooting in. You know, the same thing with the dogs earlier, which also added, tremendous step forward in management of the story. And the dust and the dogs, it's Ridley working as an artist using his own experience, and also aware of the landscape in which he'll be shooting the film. The thing about Ridley is he's got, apart from this, such a wealth of experience to draw on. He's made so many films, he's put so many feet of film through a camera, and that makes him very fast, very sure, and very insistent when he knows he's right.
That's the only time in the movie we really see Hoffman stressed out. You just see it in his eyes, this sense, I've been totally outfoxed, and I've left Ferris, my guy, completely vulnerable. Completely, totally at the mercy of this enemy.
The idea in the film is also interesting, is that because we begin and then refer to it a couple of times, a guy who was like him, who may have been present at interrogation on several occasions. It's how far do you go with interrogation? Really depending on who interrogates for what reason. If you've interrogated a guy because he's blown up a bus full of kids, your interrogation as you watch is liable to be more savage than if he has information that you want. So it's degrees of where do you stop when you're trying to do your job and do it effectively.
Like any journalist who's traveled in Iraq, I've often had to think about being kidnapped and about the nightmarish ending of those kidnappings, a beheading, such as happened to my colleague Daniel Pearl. And you think about that, and you try not to think about it. But there isn't a journalist who's been in this war zone who hasn't thought about a moment like this.
Scenes like this are one of the most terrifying features of the conflict we're in. These beheading videos. I sometimes think that people in the West haven't spent enough time thinking about what this is, about something this hideous, this horrible could actually be happening, that other human beings could do it. People in the West are always so ready and even happy to blame themselves for all the world's ills and every evil. that they don't notice that there's greater evil. To cut somebody's head off on video, you have to be some sort of morally retarded 14-year-old boy.
For a man like this to have a man like an operative CIA is a big deal. Particularly if I can make him frightened, if I can take his guard down and make him basically be bad propaganda for the CIA, that's incredibly valuable. Certainly more to them than the reality, but that's the way they would think. And he realizes that he's not going to have any of that with this guy. This guy will just go down and take what is coming. Because I think what's nice about this scene is how it comes is, to me, Ferris is already thinking about his own demise and how retribution on him at this moment is not necessarily unfair. Because this is the job he's been doing. If you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. So when it comes to it, he's probably ready to meet his maker. And it's kind of an interesting, ironic circle, full circle. So that's what he's ready to do. This guy senses it. Salim senses that. Senses that he's not going to get any shift out of Ferris. We played with the scene various ways to try and have Ferris anger Salim, which he does actually eventually. He makes him angry and he uses the hammer. Create a situation of maybe engaging in negotiation, but he's not going to have that. And so I think gradually Ferris realizes he's going to take the big one.
You know what that camera is for? It's not for this. This is intermission. It's for what comes after this. For what comes now.
I think I was happy with it, you know. And one of these scenes is always like hard to do because it's like, how far do you go, you know? And in comparison to the real thing, it's like heart-stopping. And the nice thing in the scene, what comes into the scene, is the person you'd completely forgotten about, who is suddenly standing in that room and had explained to you 2 hours ago sometimes the value of this person. But it doesn't give you any comfort because he could be just standing there and have no plan and have nothing to do with the release of him. So you're still sitting there wondering how the hell this is going to melt down. Because I think what you've forgotten about is that there's a direct connection with Hani Salam. Does this mean Hani Salam's outside? You don't know, because they let it go a long way. And that's part of, I think, Hani Salam's humor. We'll let it go the whole 9 yards before we step in, just teach this guy a lesson. Because I think Hani, in this, is not beyond him teaching him a lesson, saying, do not screw with me again, ever. If you ever deal with me again, never, ever, ever, ever lie to me, my dear. That's what he said initially. So at the end, that's what I like about the end, it follows this as Hani Salam is able to be amused in the hospital, saying, oh, but then if you died out of, told her what you did for her and she'd have loved you forever. And well, I always thought it was funny. It's like ghastly, but it's funny. So I think Ferris knows he let that go on a little bit longer than he needed to. Because actually he could have come in here when he knows he's in there. So I think Hani let it go on. Probably got the room bugged. And this guy is not giving us any comfort because he looks terrified and seems to be not part of anything.
I think people are going to find the violence very tough to watch, and they should. I mean, I think we shouldn't, if we're going to talk about what torture is, we need to understand the horrific physical violence that's part of it. And it's one of the grimmer scenes that we've seen in modern movies. But I think it's important that it be that way, as hard as it is to watch.
This is in the souk, middle of the souk in Rabat. And finally, if I'd shot in there before, I'd shot the beginning of where I get this guy arrested, the beginning of Black Hawk Down. Spice market. It's an amazing place. Wow. I wanted to feel what it's like to be the final moments of being turned on the steel table to do, the butchery. And he kind of does it so well, he kind of gives up here after a moment. I think he realized philosophically that this is it, really. And time has come. There.
Most of Leo's comments or questions about the script tended to be about this scene. We were all quite correct in assuming that if this scene didn't come out correctly, nothing might. And the thing is, you know Leonardo's not going to have his head cut off. You can know it in your mind. But in your spinal liquid, you have to think that he really is going to die.
We go on the reprise of the flashback of, a typical piece of cross-examination, interrogation with a cricket bat. Eventually, the person who was interrogated died. He probably had a heart attack, And that's what he nursed that idea, I think, throughout the process here. Really concerned about how far is too far, and at what moment do you let that happen. If you let it happen, then you really should stop doing the job. You're no longer human. And I think that's part of his subtext in this, and it kind of makes it interesting. Philosophically, it's a philosophical resolution in a funny kind of way, which is, I like that. I always like that. The wrap-up, really, when a film like this passes a scene like that, that's the end of the movie. But the wrap-up here is essential because you really want to know what's going to happen to Ferris, and will he continue? What will he do? The scenes are cynical, and because of that, I think they're amusing. And I think cynicism and humor go side by side very often, particularly if the humor is very close to the truth. And he says everything in here, but I told you not to lie to me. So the subtext here is, I warned you not to lie to me. If you hadn't lied to me, you treated me properly, I wouldn't have done this, and I wouldn't have taken this route. But let this be a lesson to you, is what he's saying. And amends in this, after this, would that happen with them? I don't know. Probably, because I always get a funny feeling that Hani Salam's a good guy.
I knew that Ridley was struggling with how to end it, and I think the decision he made was a perfect one, and one that's very faithful to the story that I wanted to tell. I mean, this is a story in which we see that America does not understand as much about this world as we think we do. That trying to fight our adversaries, trying to fight our battles, we get ourselves into problems we didn't even see coming at us. And that there are other people like Hani Pasha, people of the region, people embedded in it and its culture, who see things that we don't. And I think that's the heart of what Ridley wanted to say. Ridley saw in the story that I was trying to tell and wanted to bring to the screen, beyond a powerful, entertaining action film with great movie stars, is this story about America and the Middle East and the dilemmas we face and what we learn if we put ourselves in the mind of Roger Ferris and we move through this story. As we move now toward the ending, I think we will see the synthesis that Ridley wanted to come to. I'll wait until this plays out, but in this scene, Hani's really revealing his mastery of the elements of this story in a way that I think is A, very powerful dramatically, and B, very true to reality.
In the middle of this adaptation, I started to realize that there are more than a few similarities to A Farewell to Arms, Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. Because people go to these story classes, these script classes, whatever, somebody will always ask you, what does a hero want? And in a real world where people go around all the time not knowing what they want from day to day, having people in a film who know what they want tends to make films a little bit artificial. Most of us are figuring it out as we go along. But there is sort of an answer to what Ferris wants. He's a soldier and he's dedicated to doing what has to be done as long as possible. But in truth, what he really wants to do is, as I brought up in the meeting all those months ago, just live. It's all about individual responsibility, about doing the right thing.
I like the Middle East.
Ain't nobody likes the Middle East, buddy. There's nothing here to like.
By turning Edward Hoffman down, in a funny kind of way, it feels unrequited. Hoffman feels like an unrequited lover. His best partner's going to turn him down and gone. So I think Ed Hoffman is kind of angry, pissed at that moment, but has to accept that there's nothing can be done. But because of that, he'll still follow him with his guys on the ground and the Predator in the air. And that's why the ending is more philosophical, that they will follow him so far, and then he says, what do you want us to do? And he says, nothing, but he's done. But the end of this thing is, I'm not sure he is really done. He'll probably settle in here for a while. Will he go and see the girl? Will he, engage with the girl in a real relationship? What will happen? Who knows? And I like that. I like the film to feel that it has an ongoing life of its own. And so this ending for me is kind of perfect. With a disappointed Ed, a bemused and wiser Ferris, who actually has traded his job in for a real life with a relationship, maybe. Not a bad trade with that lady.
At the end of my novel, Roger Ferris decides that he, just as in the movie, doesn't want to be in Ed Hoffman's world anymore and wants out. And so he marries the woman that he loves. In the book, her name is Alice. This leaves that question of what he and Aisha will do ambiguous. But they go off together, and the book says they embed themselves in this world of the Middle East. They have a child, and they have to go to ground and move cities. And the last line of the book is, and so they lived. And I do think that this ending that we're seeing with Leo and the camera pulling back is saying the same thing. That this is a man who's walking away from Hoffman and his world toward a world he can't really predict. And so he lives, and so he will live. And I think, as someone who's fascinated by, deeply troubled by the Middle East and the difficulties we've gotten ourselves into there, that to the extent that we can go on a journey like Roger Ferris goes on in this movie and try to understand, connect, fight deadly adversaries, but also understand the ordinary people who are part of this world, and walk away finally from the conventional way of dealing with it into that world itself, as the camera of our lives pulls back and sees us, heading off in a way. Who can predict how this story will end for Ferris or for any of us? But I think that's the way that I wanted my story to end, and that's the way that Ridley decided to make the movie end. And to me, there's a truth about it. When you see a movie that's made of your book, if you're a novelist, it's one of the great feelings in life. It's like getting hit by lightning and surviving. It's really too good to be true. When the director is somebody of the quality of Ridley Scott, when the actors are as good as Leo DiCaprio and Russell Crowe and Mark Strong, it's a thrill. My reaction when I first saw this movie was just to be blown away by it. Forgive the term, it was an out-of-body experience. What makes me happy is that, to me, this is, it's a film that just doesn't let up in terms of the excitement. It just goes boom, boom, boom from scene to scene, and I hope is really entertaining for people who watch it, but is also faithful to the larger story that I wanted to tell in my novel, Body of Lies, which is a story about America and the Middle East, which is a story about all of us and where we're going, and a story about what we need to learn to get it right. And I think that Ridley, in a very subtle way, never taking away from the entertainment value of this movie, has said something that I hope is going to stay with us and let people turn it over in their minds as they walk out of the theater, as they watch the DVD. And I hope that will be enriching for people who see this story.